Hello, my kako. I send a warm greeting of welcome to all of you in the American Association for Geographers family who are joining us for this webinar series, which has been organized as a prelude to the annual conference of the organization, which will be held in Honolulu in April of 2024. My name is Neil Hannes. I'm from Hawaii. I have a consulting company called Ho'okele Strategies, and I've been retained by the American Association for Geographers to assist with community engagement. And one of the delightful tasks I've had is to arrange and organize these webinar series to really help your membership prepare to be here and hit the ground running with a lot of knowledge about the Hawaiian worldview, about the geography of our place, and some of the issues that are occurring here. We started with, this is the third in our series, and we started with the first about the duties and the values of host and guest and how they engage, because you're visitors to our land. And second, in our second webinar series, we talked about our own Hawaiian chant of creation and our beliefs about how a place comes to be. And this third one is particularly exciting. I'm glad you're joining us for this one because it's about how we then settled upon this land and how we did so traditionally and how we did so, how that changed over time as other people came and systems and the footprint upon the land was altered. And we've got two great speakers for us to do this today, Kawika McKeague and Konia Freitas, longtime friends and highly respected in our planning community and in our cultural community. So it's delightful to have our audience join us and be interested in this topic. And we have two people with us today who have much to share. So we're going to get right to them, knowing that at the end, we'll please put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to them in the last 20 to 30 minutes of the show. They've got a lot of content to share, but we'll be monitoring the chat to make sure that we engage on the issues that matter to you. So please do so, and I'll do my best to get to those questions at the end. But without further ado, I want to turn it over to Konia and Kawika. Aloha mai kako, aloha.
Aloha no, kuhoa.
Aloha mai, mahalo Neil. I will get started. Let's see, wait just 1 minute. Even though you practice this, you still kind of mess it up. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this is working. Yep. All right, excellent. All right, welcome everyone. We'll begin, the topic that we're going to be discussing is Kanohona o ka po'e Hawaii nei. So let's get started. O hanau te mo tuaku pua laua loa aamu o ali ta mo tuia luno Hawaii. No Hawaii ne no te mo tu he puleva ka aina he naka Hawaii. E leva vale ana i talani leva. Mali e I ke te mo te meta honu. Pa a Hawaii, la a Hawaii, I ke a he mo. Belina mai me ke aloha. I'm Konia Freitas, and my introduction begins with a Hawaiian chant or an oli that celebrates the birth of the Hawaiian chief Kauikeao'oli Kamehameha Ekolu, Kamehameha III. This section of the chant depicts the evolution of Hawaiian flora until a fully formed island is presented before us. I shared this chant with you as a welcoming and as a reflection of my connection to my homeland. I come from the Ahupua'a of Halava'uka on Oahu Island. I still reside on the lands where my parents built their home and raised their children. My parents, my makua, are from Hawaii Island, from Hilo and Kohala. In terms of my work experience, I've worked in both public and private sector, beginning at the Office of State Planning as an administrative assistant. The work was okay, but I truly came to admire the work of public planners. Intrigued by the scope of land use and social program planning projects, I went to the university and received a master's degree in urban and regional planning. I worked for a handful of years in a small private planning firm in Honolulu. But after several years of working, I became disillusioned with knowledge and its critical role in planning for our islands. I eventually took a position at Kamakakūokalani Center for Hawaiian Studies, where I work till today. I do evaluation and program planning. I've served as the department chair, and I continue to conduct research in Indigenous planning. So aloha mai kako. Today, we want to take a deep dive into the notion of noho, or kanohona, or kanohoana. These terms are loaded with meaning. On the one hand, it refers to a residence or a dwelling, but it also means a mode of life, existence, or relationship. So we observe in one term, we get a literal understanding, yet we are able to transcend this mundane towards our Hawaiian perceptions of reality, and we understand the primacy of relationships. And let me add right here that occasionally you're going to hear my neighbors, the chickens and the myna birds, they want to be involved too, but just so you know, I'm at home and that's what we're surrounded by. So for today's topic, we question what has influenced our living in Hawaii, and really who gets to decide our future, and by extension, our relationships to place. And how does this play out in Hawaii? Kawika will go into great detail, highlighting a case in Waikiki, in the Ahupua'a of Waikiki on Oahu Island, specifically a famous area known as Ainahau. So key takeaways from today's presentation. Hawaii has its own unique culture, history, and language, and much of this is owed to our location, our nature of settlement in the islands, and by who? Who settled Hawaii, right? Speaking to our oceanic genealogies. The primacy of relationship is illustrated by our mo'olelo and the stories of place. Relationship building, especially ecological and environmental relationship building, is premised on our sense of spirituality. And lastly, understanding what information tells us about a place, for example, what a digital map or a USG map tells us is a very different idea from the mindset of a place. So my discussion will set the stage by examining these key points above, and Kawika will illustrate these points through his discussion of Princess Ka'iulani's estate located in Ainahau in the Ahupua'a of Waikiki. And let's see, we will be using a lot of Hawaiian terminology today. So if while we're talking, you want to take a look at vehevehe.com or vehevehe wiki, these are excellent resources for Hawaiian terminologies. They're Hawaiian dictionaries, digital dictionaries. So, like I said, Hawaii has its own unique culture, history, and language, and much of this is owed to our location and how our islands were settled and by whom. This sets the trajectory for how we understand the place and our existence in this place, Hawaii. And we benefit from not only our own stories, but from science. Holomai Pele is one epic that informs us about the peopling of Hawaii. The peopling of Hawaii is understood to have been led by at least two major migrations. These chants, or oli, record these remarkable events of humankind. Pualani Kanakaʻole Kanahele observes that the migrations chronicled in Hawaiian chants are vital because they not only record the arrival of people, animals, and plants, but it also signals the arrival of, quote, of the elemental forms, namely the outpour of Pele, unquote. Pele is a fascinating term because on the one hand, it can refer to the deity or Nakua Pele with a big P. And it also refers to Pele, this elemental form of lava. One notable Hawaiian chant entitled Mai Kahiki Kawahine o Pele opens with the following lines. Mai kahiki mai kawahine o Pele, mai kaaina I pola pola, mai kapu nohu ula akani, mai kiao lapa lapa I kalani, mai ka opua lapa I kahiki, lapa ku I Hawaii kawahine o Pele. The woman explodes, the woman Pele explodes to Hawaii. On the other hand, science tells us another story of the peopling of Hawaii. Scientists estimate that there are at least 2 major migrations to Hawaii. The first from the Marquesas as early as 300 AD, and the second from Tahiti between 1000, 1300 AD. There were perhaps 3 or 4 surges of movements by early seafaring peoples outward from their homelands, most likely Taiwan, eastward into the Pacific. It's generally accepted that the ancestors of the Polynesians were known as Lapita, the Lapita peoples. So this migration is even more spectacular in terms of human achievement, given that the Hawaiian Islands are one of the more geographically isolated places on Earth. From the closest continental landmass and about 800 miles from the nearest island. Emerging from a volcanic hotspot rising from the seafloor of the Pacific Ocean, the Hawaiian archipelago formed nearly 75 million years ago. With the eldest island of the chain long since eroded and submerged beneath the sea surface, located to the northwest, the youngest of the islands, Hawaii, is still forming beneath the sea surface to the southeast. And in fact, Pele is erupting currently as we speak. With these migration chants, mele and stories, the primacy of relationships starts to come into view. Rubelite Kavena Johnson, the brilliant scholar of the Kumulipo, explains how this 2,000-line genealogical chant records the beginning of the Hawaiian world. And as such, it provides a coherent understanding of the dimensions of time and space. Kumu, meaning the source, and lipo, meaning dark, night, or chaos, signifies the coupling of these 2 worlds and the beginning of Hawaiian time. Kapa Oliveira, in her book entitled Ancestral Places, Understanding Kanaka Geography, further outlines the land grows from the depth of darkness and evolves into Kapai Aina Hawaii, or the Hawaiian archipelago. The Kumulipo establishes the rights of ali'i, or our chiefs, to rule by connecting high-ranking lineages back to the creation of the world and the gods. The chant signifies the birth order that sets the hierarchy of man's relationship to our land, or to the land, with humankind emerging much later in this order. This birth order is conceptualized in several Hawaiian proverbs. For example, he ali'i ka aina, he kaua ke kanaka. The land is the chief and man the servant. Kame'ele Hiva discusses how genealogies are the Hawaiian conception, or the Hawaiian concept of time, and genealogies really serve as the history of the people. You'll notice that when we talk about history in Hawaii, we don't necessarily refer to a year or a time, but rather we refer to the chief who ruled during that time. So genealogies and the role of the chiefs really signifies, it really goes back to the beginning of evolution and the Kumulipo. That's memorialized in the Kumulipo. So genealogies, in this way, A fundamental premise of relationships involves the ohana and the lands that they are associated with. The well-respected Hawaiian scholar Kawena Pukui in Nana Ike Kumu explains that ohana means family. It can refer to a clan or an extended family with multiple generations living together in an area. The term ohana is derived from the oha or the taro, especially taro grown from the original stock called kalo. Adding the na pluralizer means many, so you get oha, ohana. Thus, Pukui helps us to understand that the members of the ohana, like the taro roots, are all from the same root, or the same stock. The ohana is the most fundamental unit of social organization. Till today, the homeland of ohana, their aina, were complementary factors, and Pukui helps us to understand this more deeply. She says this because that word ai in aina is a verb which means to feed, and the na, which is the suffix, puts it to that which feeds. So we can see this concept in our language, right? The coupling of ohana to their aina, to their land. And we can see these concepts played out in our language. So for example, ohana kupa means old family, but it really refers to several generations living in the same place over a long duration of time. Kupa oka aina, or native of the land, suggests time and place, and it really reflects the ties between people or ohana to place. Kua aina means the back of the land, referring to those who, by working the land, carry the burden of the land on their backs. Many ohana make up the population of a district. Ohana were situated in kauhale, which were comprised of several houses so a kauhale made up the permanent home of ohana. Each kauhale was made up of standalone hale or houses in which each hale had a distinct use. This is a very different conception of living compared to today, where all the functions of a household sit under one roof. Many kauhale made up a kulana kauhale, or a village, which was the larger setting for an ohana. So given this context then, and depending on the situation, one kauhale of ohana could be between 80 to 100 people. These were very large configurations. Ohana settled within their kauhale and were invested in communal living and shared labor, with the resources from the land and the sea distributed between and among ohana, from the uplands, from Mauka to Makai, the shoreward areas. And this sharing and this communal sharing and sharing of labor happens until today. We share what we have between and among ohana who may reside in the same district, and even with our extended family who have even moved away. So the best example of this for most ohana is maybe a baby party or a graduation party, or even a ho'oleva, a funeral, where the extended family share in the labor of the event, and they share in the bounty that's been collected or assembled for the event. But Pukui, Kawena Pukui, put it the best. She says, in many areas in Hawaii today, ohana as a cooperative social institution continues to serve as a force that regulates the personal, social, and economic sectors of island living. So Hawaii was one of the first states in the US to designate state land use categories, and there are 4. They exist still today. They haven't been changed, and those are rural land use categories, urban, agriculture, and conservation. This accounting for land use pales, however, in comparison to the distinct land use divisions of our kupuna and the resources that are contained in these various kinds of land use districting that our kupuna had. On Oahu, for example, Chief Maili Kukahi is generally credited for clearly marking and reorganizing land boundaries. The mokupuni, or the island, was typically divided up into moku, or districts. The ahupua'a is a land division that extends from the uplands to the sea, but more and more as we research into ahupua'a, we learn that more often than not, the shape, size, and land characteristics between ahupua'a vary widely. So this idea of a pie-shaped wedge explanation was perhaps convenient, but not entirely accurate. The Hawaiian economy was based on an exchange system that existed within the ahupua'a, and it provided everything needed in close proximity. The ahupua'a was also further divided into ili, or ili aina, and this subdivision of land was allotted to ohana, where they lived and cultivated them. The ili would typically stay within a family regardless of who was the chief or the konahiki of an ahupua'a. So Kanakawiwi planned their kauhale around these cultivated field systems and other necessary material resources needed for daily living. This defined really their settlement patterns in terms of adjacency and access to resources. And interestingly enough, today, urban planners are trying to implement this same type of configuration in order to reduce driving, reduce emissions, reduce the cost of infrastructure development, or increase walking and biking. And it's really a part of a larger system of resiliency planning, among other things. So under this system of living, ohana were generally able to maintain long-term relationships with a specific parcel of land, even though the ali'i, or the chief of that larger ahupua'a or district, might change. It's creating a deep sense of spirituality that's tied to place. Edward Kanahele describes the significance of place to personal well-being of the Hawaiian by examining the concept of vahipana, significant, important, or sacred places. Kanahele writes that by recalling stories, Hawaiians are constantly reminded of who we are, where we come from, and who we are related to. The concept of vahipana merges the importance of place with that of the spiritual. Native Hawaiian vahipana include dwelling places of the gods, deities, venerable disciples, shrines, selected observation points, cliffs, mounds, mountains, weather phenomenon, forests, and volcanoes. Events, individuals, and their functions also define a vahipana. It is the belief held by some Hawaiians, not all, that life integrates the world of the seen and the unseen in complementary parts. This kind of balance, or this lokahi, are necessary for a healthy and natural existence. And in this way, vahipana provide a sense of belonging to an individual or their ohana, to both the living and to those who have passed on. So these places really offer a sense of well-being. So it's really important to comprehend and understand that to knowingly destroy a vahipana is to deliberately destroy our ability to lead a balanced life. So I am going to end here so we can bring these concepts to life, really, by learning about Princess Kaiulani's estate in Ainahau, located in the ahupua'a of Waikiki. So I will hand it over to Kawika. Mahalo.
Hey, mahalo Konia. Aloha mai kako. Just give me 1 second as I'm also trying to just configure, make sure everything is where it needs to be so you have an engaging conversation. So like Konia, I thought it'd be appropriate to start with protocol that sets tone, invites presence, But because we're in this virtual space, I was going to share mine in a virtual digital format. And someone kindly reminded me that back in 2009 in New York City, of all places, there's a small video of myself with my kumuhula, my teacher and mentor, who I'll talk about in just a second. Anyway, to set the tone, I want to share this quick moment with you folks, a blast from the past, as we call it. Again, aloha mai. These are my mountains, the mountains that raised me. The upper left is Pu'umakakilo in the distance. I'm standing on Pu'upalailai in a place that's now considered to be the second city in Kapolei on the island of Oahu. I currently reside in a lovely place. Konia spoke of these land divisions in the Ili Aina o Waikalua in the Ahupo of Kaneohe in the Moko of Ko'olapoko on the island of Oahu, which is considered to be the wet side, the windward side of the island. This picture here on the right is a phenomena of sunlight hitting the clouds, casting a form of that reminds us of fire, and fire obviously is a very sensitive matter of phenomena in our community right now. But in this particular case, this phenomena sits over the highest peak point of Ko'olapoko, which is Kiahia Kahoi, literally the fires of Kahoi, which lends a connectivity between that high point and at least two other geographical points towards the ocean. These are my, I'd call mo'o, my nephews, but they are really the succession of genealogy of our family for their minds and their connectivity as young Hawaiians in this place. They know their stories, they know their language, and in that, they know their identity of who they're going to be when they grow up. One wants to be a farmer, one wants to be a warrior. I kind of find that sort of endearing. This is my lovely wife and my daughter. These are my Ys. And again, as I mentioned, my source of being, I have a master's in urban and regional planning and emphasis in environmental and community engagement, same school as Konia, where we met before that in Hawaiian language classes many moons ago. But I would say my second school of knowledge in the formalities of being a student of Victoria Hanaka'ulani Malu Takamine as a hula practitioner, but really how we were using hula, chant, storytelling, informed history as a means of cultural expression and advocacy in the political arena, particularly in the late 1990s to current, was where I got my chops, if you will, in becoming a community advocate. And really, her takeaway and mandate to me was to infiltrate a system of decision-making relative to the care of our resources, the stewardship of our aina, as Konia said, that which feeds and maintains us, and the well-being and resiliency of our community. I'm using Waikiki and specifically Aina as a place of focus. One, it's someplace perhaps familiar to you even as Malihini, as visitors. This is the place you'll be coming to next April, and you'll be residing here at I think it's the Hilton Hawaiian Village. And I set the tone with this picture because to Konia's point, this was a place of agrarian abundance, at flowing water. It was a place of life. It was a place of royal residence and of governance. From the earliest times of the 15th century, it was a place of innovation with the extensive auai or irrigation ditches that were created to expand the need to support ohana in Kauhale as that community grew in that time. Today, as many know and are understanding, it's a global resort destination. And maybe perhaps some of us as Kanaka no longer see the cultural relevance, connection, and identity that exists in this place. I feel though it's still a community. It's a community of residences, of mixed races, mixed experiences. It's a place, yes, of commerce, but I still say there's a place of culture. And in that place of culture, there's explorations, these kipuka, these little oases of opportunity to explore, even in the urban interface. Konia and I have been able to share many Mānoa, and I wanted to actually bring her voice forward in a different capacity, that she inspires me in what she does. And so she calls out, at least in one of her writings, about spatial legitimacy, and the aspect that even though we infiltrate these systems, there's still a context that defines who has the control over the land and the resources, and in that control, an ability to exclude. So my attempt today is to kind of recodify, what do we demand in this conversation of sense of place and community, and how do we, in Konia's own words, be generative of social, economic, and political meaning, rather than perhaps what is relegated today as aesthetic choices. And I'll explain that in just a moment. But that's the adventure we're going to go on. So to set the tone, here is the project area of interest. We reference as Aina Hao. It's the site today of the Princess Kaiulani Hotel. It is the former lands of the ili of Auaukai. And what I really want to highlight here was just the connection that even in the urban form, and you can see all of that in white, that there are still these relevancies and connectivities to these high points. And each of these points has a name. Each of those names has not just a meaning, but a story, a place of relevance in terms of our ancestral knowledge, being able to connect and to amplify consciousness, really, to understand that relationship over time and over space, and within that of responsibility. The area in question covers about 12 acres that was gifted to Princess Kaiulani, and I'll speak to her in just this next slide here. So before I dive into this, I want to also bring Anakala Neil and his ohana into this. Actually, I don't about to play it. This is his son, as part of a group, singing a song of this exact song of Aina Ha, which I'll explain in just a moment. I actually played in the background because I just want to keep talking here, and hopefully you can get a sense of the feeling of the mele. This mele was composed for Victoria Kavikiu Kaiulani Luna Lilo Kalani Nui Ahi Lapa Lapa Cleghorn. She was born on October 16th, 1875. Her mother, shown here in the bottom, is Princess Miriam Kapili Ke Kaulu Ohi Like, who is the sister of King David Kalakaua and Queen Liliuokalani, our last reigning mo'i or queen. And her father was a Scottish businessman and also a famed horticulturalist, Archibald Scott Cleghorn, who also was the governor of Oahu. Princess Kaiulani was the only child born to this dynasty, and as such, she was seen as the last hope of the nation, literally the direct heir to the throne of the kingdom after Liliuokalani. And she had inherited these lands, which were lovingly named as Aina Hao, that land of Hao, that land of a chill, but a cooling chill of comfort. And in this particular song, composed by her mother for her, it was to liken the qualities of space and place, the breezes, the scent of the lipoa, the seaweed off of the ocean, the various forms of vegetation, to the presence of her daughter and what her daughter stood for. Her name itself, Kaiulani, literally means to be placed on a promontory, on a place of prominence, of sacredness, of consecration. And I show this little picture here of a carnation, and I'll explain this in just a moment, that at a certain point in time, after the overthrow, our queen was overthrown in 1893, and that Princess Kaiulani, when she came back to Honolulu in 1897, I believe, she was greeted on the boat she came on by the natives with these leis of carnations. And the story goes because it was sort of a subtle way, because we were, again, I use the word invasion of a certain sort, to communicate a sense of loyalty, a sense of honor, a sense of recognition that that lineage was still their queen to be, And unfortunately, though, Kaiulani died at the age of 23 due to rheumatism, I believe. And so therefore, the hope of the nation was never seen, at least through Kaiulani's abilities and work ethic. However, she still stands as a testament and reminder. It still reminds us that these mele, as composed, tell us a story, not just of a time, but remind us and give us courage, even into the contemporary. This again is a picture of her where in a newspaper she was quoted in 1897 saying, "Aole o make make ka mohai, aka ike aloha ko o mau makaina na." And simply put, she did not need any tribute. She just needed the aloha of her people. And that was a beautiful message from her as a young aliyah, hope for the future, to the point where when she came back, she saw destitution and she saw poverty and she saw what had happened in a period from, we kind of point to the arrival of contact with Cook as a point of intervention, if you will, around 1778. And at that time, different scholars will suggest that we had about 400,000 to 800,000 Hawaiians that were here at that time. What we do know is that that number by 1823 was down to 134,000. About 83% of our native Hawaiian population in the first 45 years post, quote, contact was subjected to things like smallpox, cholera, leprosy, bubonic plague, tuberculosis, measles, mumps, whooping cough, of which we did not have the immunity and the ability, our kupuna did not. And so as such, what we do know is that by 1896, so just in over 100-year period, our numbers were down to 39,504 is the number I have on my screen. So that means, 90 to 95% of the population presumably lost. That in and of itself is horrific. It's a form of genocide, I would call it. But in that, the knowledge and connection to place, those memories, those recalling of place names of the mele and oli of that time, lost, but perhaps not totally forgotten, because there was still resiliency in those who survived to codify the memory through the advocacy of literacy, through the publication of Mānoa and knowledge in what became one of the most highly, we were an island or nation that was highly literate in the forms of creating publications of numerous newspapers, all in Hawaiian language, accounting for what was happening in the time, but also recalling from the past forward so that our generation at some point in time could access that information. So even though when she returned in 1897, she came back to a very much changed homeland that was on the brink of annexation, she herself was still a reminder of hope. And this particular chant was created for her. He noa no kalani nui ahi lapa lapa. Ahi vehi ke ia no Kaiulani no ka wohi kukahi lea kapili. This song composed in honor of Kaiulani, Ahi pua loke no aina hao. This reference of loke or a rose actually honors the fact that Robert Louis Stevenson was a family friend to the family who composed a famous composition entitled The Island Rose in 1889. And even though, and this particular chant, continues to just bring the characteristics and traits and those memories of our ancestral antiquity into the present for that time. It was composed by Ellen Kikoa Ohivai Kalani Wright Prendergast, who was a friend of the deposed Queen Liliuokalani and a composer of many mele. These mele lahui, we would call them, songs for the nation. And it was composed, if you see here on the date, March 11th, 1893. This is approximately 2 months after the overthrow of January 17th, 1893. And so it was these kinds of activities by the everyday person to codify and to create sense of resiliency through words and connections over time of the things that were important. What you see here in the pictures are these metaphors of the iliahi, of the blossoms of the cherished ahihi of Panaeva, to the pupukanio, those kahuli snails, those native snails. And really the rarity, we weren't at one time about gold and these accoutrements that are shiny objects. Our beauty in nature was what was truly valued and highly recognized. So as a modern Hawaiian, these are viewscapes out my window in the morning and in the evening. And Kaiulani carries this name, Kalani Nui Ahi Lapa Lapa, that of the sacred flame. And even though it's perhaps personified in her nature and character and the memory of chants, I feel like as a Hawaiian in 2023, I still feel her presence. I still see her inspiration. I still and motivated by the hope she carried in the work that I try to do. And if you haven't figured it out, as a wannabe amateur historian, as a Hawaiian historian, time is not linear or sequential sometimes. And as not alluded to, but as spoken by Konia, we move in different space as to what was happening and not necessarily when it was happening. So bringing this forward, the importance of mapping, another source and tool, another perspective, shifting us to looking at perhaps things you're familiar with. Again, the USGS map here provides a snapshot that preserves place names, the ridge names, the streams, the water sources, its data. But how do we utilize that data? And frankly, how is that data perpetuated and lost? Over time, Indigenous people have and continue to respond to systematic attempts to eradicate our existence. And I'll say relative to map making, what you probably notice if you pull up a map today in GIS of Oahu, of this area, again, Waikiki for reference is right in here. That hotel is right here. These place names no longer exist in their fullness. So even from 1993 or thereabouts, 2003 was the last edition of this, to now in 20 years. Some of those place names are no longer on our digital maps. And the question is, well, who's making those decisions? And I think it's the ethical responsibility for anyone in this work to support the recovery of not just the knowledge, but to support our local communities and Indigenous communities to facilitate not just materiality of presence in the perpetuation of these kinds of maps, but also the memory that comes with them across space and time. So this is the adventure I'm trying to take you on. So I'm gonna do this quickly because I'm also realizing I've got about 18 minutes left to take you through about another 150 years or so. So let's move on. What you're looking at here is a map from 1881 that's documenting what was known for Waikiki. The main highlights, as shared by Konia, was that these little, polygons are indicative of either a house lot, of an agricultural lot that was cultivating the traditional crops of the time. Not all of these forms here are necessarily roadways, but are waterways, these connective irrigation ditches that flowed all the way down into the area that was Waikiki. And as you can see, in 1881, Waikiki was a much very different landscape. It was primarily the catch-all of the water, vastly produced in agriculture. And then these little polygons right here are a series of fish ponds, inland fish ponds that fed the people. So we know this was a thriving community because, again, you wouldn't necessarily have fish ponds in all these lo'i in production if you weren't trying to feed the nation. But to understand Waikiki is also to understand where the water comes from. So on this map from 1883, I believe, we have the high points of the back of Ko'olau, Poko on this side of the island, Konahua Nui and Waiakeakua. Konahua Nui is a poetic ascription to these, that's the collection of water, and Waiakeakua literally means the water of the gods, which depicts a sense of sacredness. We understand that in today's world as the high point of our watersheds, right? So is it a place that human beings, that man should dwell? Probably not. And so even in our ascription in traditional times, this was considered probably what we call the wau or the vau, the realm of Akua, the realm of the god, not a place for man to belong, because this is where water is caught. And then these would flow down to these fish ponds. Again, want to point out a couple of things that may be of interest, that the Hilton Hawaiian Village site is in this area here. What you'll notice is this Hawaiian term kahawai, which indicates a stream. There was 3 streams flowing through Waikiki here at the time. So the Hilton Hawaiian Village is here, and the roadway that exists, Kalakaua Avenue, is what is once known as Pi'inaio Stream. The area that I'm going to focus on for further discussion, where Kaiulani comes in and her family and her legacies up in this area here, where you see this term Apua Keha, which was the name of the stream, and Mulivai. Mulivai is that interface of the freshwater lens that's coming from the fresh streams as it starts to intersect the Pacific Ocean, which is denoted here. So that intersection of sort of brackish water, or that water has all the nutrients for the different seaweeds to grow and for the coral polyps to propagate, which are also in our cosmogonic origins, of which then the nearshore fisheries are thriving and also abundant. This was Waikiki in 1881. And again, this is just depictions of some of the phenomena that exist today. This is Wa'ahila Ridge, one of my spiritual sanctuaries here of the forest. And just to kind of explain it, if you've never been in an island ecosystem, that The island and its environment, the native trees still are cloud catchers that form mist. These mists then turn into rain droplets that feed our streams and also go into our basal aquifer system and penetrate to provide groundwater. And that even the dripping of water droplets off of the native plants that feed the ferns and the grasses, all one living ecosystem. And that is really the connotation of the imbuement of life. And as the life continues to flow through Mānoa stream, it then creates a feeding ground. This particular, what you see here is an agricultural system that's actually within the University of Hawaii at Mānoa campus, of which Konia, as a professor, is a member and actually was the director. This is one of the last, I say, living ecosystems that thrives within this urban core, but there are others that are looking to come online. So it's a place of knowledge, it's a place of learning, it's a place of inspiration. And as you can see here, the water literally feeds from the stream through an OY, or like a sluice ditch, I guess, that moves water into this system. And what's beautiful about this, and this comes from innovation of ideas and knowledge going back to how I was taught, to about the 1500s, if not even earlier in the 1400s, from Kamakakūokalani. So the idea that water filtrates in, and then actually there's an outlet, so the water returns to the stream. And the way this system is designed, the water still maintains high quality and nutrients, but yet creates these living systems of food production. And this exists today. This is just an example. This is not in Waikiki, but as a place of inspiration of, again, how the mountains through the stream systems then feeds these coastal estuaries. This is a outlet fish pond system, not an inland system. And again, though, this is just to say we create abundance of fish that fed the people, but this was to indicate that this was an indicator of a healthy population. Again, just highlighting Hilton Hawaiian Village, for those who are interested, is located in this part of that order map. And that for the rest of my time here this morning, I'm going to focus on this area. So Puakeha, what's interesting here, I think it's interesting, and if you're into maps and those kinds of things, you see the transition over time. What you see here on the property, again, there's starting to see some change. You see these names and numbers. These names are the names of families who stepped forward during a period of time, about the 1830s, 1840s, with Kamehameha III, of which Konia opening chant paid homage to, and we didn't even coordinate that. But he was in a difficult position. He was in time probably of the utmost change, of going from traditional to this new contemporary idea of things like land ownership, establishing treaties with different nations to be recognized in the global arena, feeling the pressures of foreign interests to own land in Hawaii. And that resulted in, and again, don't have the time to explain it all, but sort of this idea of the ownership of land first coming to be with what we call the mahele, and the division of that land for different purposes and uses. What led to those two things, one was to ensure the rights of native tenants, was the establishment of the 1850 Kuleana Act. And at the same time, in the same year, there was also another act called the Resident Alien Act, which allowed foreigners for the first time to own land. So what you see here is the names of those Hawaiian families that were still thriving. You also see here this word hale kula, and I'll zoom here a little bit, which was a school, which was part of the Kalavina Church, or the Calvinist Missionary Church. So we're starting to see changes of use and patterns, and the advance of Christianity coming in around 1820 upon the landscape. But that natural resource, the Puakeha Mulivai, still exists along these lands. And I'll say this for another day, but even in these Hawaiian language newspapers, there were these descriptions, and this particular highlight, which I won't go into detail, speaks of this Mulivai of Puakeha and likens the coolness of the area to one of our future monarchs, which was going to be Lunalilo, who owned land adjacent to this property here. So again, 1887, again, we're starting to see little notes of the landscape changing and or information being lost already. The name of the stream is not on here. And as we move forward, 1897, what you start to see too is also loss of memory of who's making the map. So Puakeha is misspelled. We start to see transition and introduction of the landscape being changed by other uses. And now we're approaching a period in about the early 1900s, around 1910, just from a map making perspective, Puakeha is even more bastardized in its spelling. The spelling is really off, and no longer is the Mulivai there. That connection is no longer documented. So by the turn of 1910, it has now become, quote unquote, a lagoon, that continuation of water flow, which is indicative of life. is starting to feel the effects and will be even more exasperated by the reclamation of the reclamation of the Alawai, which was a purposeful capital improvements project to basically kill all the water in Waikiki to make it what it is today as a resort district. You also note here that this was the first hotel, the Moana Hotel in 1901 was established here, and supporting needs like an ice house. So again, this kind of give you a quick flavor out. I unfortunately don't have the time to go through it all. 1927, Sanborn fire maps trying to show infill of cottages and a changing of the landscape. Again, a quick picture of this is one of the oldest pictures I'm aware of 1857 of the traditional cultural landscape. These are pictures of Aina Hau. So even though these are still considered royal lands or Hawaiian lands, you can definitely see the influences of that change in the built infrastructure, the built structures themselves. The advance of, again, the First Lady of Waikiki, the Moana Hotel, born in 1901 as a hotel, continually modified through 1908. You start to see also the advancement of changes in transportation with the Honolulu Rapid Transit. And here you still see a portion of a Puakehau in the distance here. But again, that connectivity, the sand berm is starting to change those relationships. You still see back here, even though you have a hotel, we still have some density of agricultural patches. But again, because of that dispossession off of Aina and because of the diminution of population, we're now seeing the change of who's working that land and the advancement of the first wave of immigrants from Japanese, Chinese, Filipino sources of origin, now coming and utilizing those lands for different purposes, for rice and eventually plantation. Again, that's showing the advancement of this hotel here over time. And again, that landscape was also changing. By the 1950s, there's new capital improvement projects to tear down what was there to start building and making way for what would become the Princess Kaiulani Hotel. So really the presentation here is just to show like how quickly these changes were happening and pretty adversely around the time. However, our royalty still existed. These are the samples of pictures ranging from 1874 to 1921 of our li'i and their adaptation to still have a presence in Waikiki of royal residents. And not just having presence, but they were accessible to the people. There's many ascriptions in the newspapers that talk about the congeniality of the li'i being likened to having the character of heart, and we call that opuali'i, and the benevolence that comes from that. That benevolence comes from a sense of reciprocation of aloha aku, of love extended, love received, honor extended, honor received. And so then by the turn of the century, we have everything from, like I mentioned, this reclamation of this capital improvement project, which has its whole crazy history, that it was due to a concern of public safety and public health, that since these fields were no longer being upkept, they were deemed to be unsanitary and therefore to be sources of concern for other diseases brought by mosquitoes. And so therefore the solution was, let's fill these lands in and let's dredge it and kill off life. I see that with a sense of like exasperation. And I know we're getting short on time here.
Kawika,
yeah.
Catch your breath. So far I only see one question, so I think easily you could take another five minutes or so, add it to your time. So I want to offer you that right now, and also encourage people to ask those questions that they may have in the Q&A portion of our Zoom format.
Okay, so I'm gonna go really fast here.
But don't go too fast. Don't go too fast. You just take your time and get through the content. Mahalo.
So in Waikiki, again, we're definitely seeing the landscape changing, the water being redirected, being filled in, and what was becoming the beginnings of this resort destination starting to take shape here. Concomitantly, again, as I was mentioning, changes in other parts of the landscape. This is a sugar plantation, for better or for worse, of which my heritage comes from. A young John McKeague comes to Hawaii from Coleraine. As a 12, 13-year-old, he learns from his uncle, Dr. Alexander Kennedy, in the area of Nu'uanu, to test pilot sugarcane. And through a negotiation with Abner Paki, the father of Princess Pauahi, secures about 7,000 acres, of which at the time of its highlights, it was producing about 10 tons of sugarcane per day, which for its time was impressive. We also saw the advancement of other things like the canning of pineapple. So Libby McNeil coming in. And at this time too, we have changes in our governance, things like a bayonet constitution, which I don't have time to explain. I use the word bayonet though, because literally it was to the idea that our King David Kalakaua was subjected to having to kind of do this in terms of balancing a foreign interest without necessarily subjecting his people to further loss. And eventually with Lili'uokalani herself being overthrown, and I share these pictures of what was commemorated as when the flag was taken down, the Hawaiian flag, that is, the High Hawaii, during this time, and the Committee of Safety, these 13 American business owners who essentially led through the overthrow and establishment of this provisional government, where eventually Hawaii was purportedly and not legally annexed. You can do your history, check it out, to the United States in 1898. What you see here in the upper left-hand corner was about 2 months ago that the Queen's Royal Standard, which was stolen and through a series of inheritance was passed down to foreigners, was actually returned to Hawaii for the first time. So again, I just share these things that, yes, history happened and there's some really bad things that happen, but again, there's still these opportunities and we still have resilience and we still exist and we still thrive and we're still going to be here for millennia to come. Again, just showing changes over the landscape. And I need to go quickly through this, but as you can see, this is now becoming a city. We have now tourists coming to visit the islands via the Pan American plane. Prior to that, it was mostly via steamship. And now even the advancement of American expansionism into the Pacific, military occupation of Hawaii as a beachhead to the Pacific is seen here on Waikiki, where Waikiki became a primarily both a rec center, but also a coastal battery, which adjacent to the Hilton Hawaiian Village, you will see this green open space, which is the fort, called it Fort Durusi Park, but it's still part of an older landscape. I think is still called Kalehuawehe or Kawehewehe. And there's a war museum that you can visit. Again, now the establishment of the city is almost not recognizable. This is an older picture of Hilton Hawaiian Village. I challenge you, even for its time in the 70s, you will not recognize that landscape with the infill development and what changes out over time. This is an older picture of International Marketplace. I'm just queuing you up. I challenge you to find International Marketplace today. It's not what that picture shows you today. It's completely different, for better or for worse. This is the landscape as it is in 2022. And again, this evening shot with the light, shows everything from consumption of power to just how the landscape is no longer agriculture, except for these small pockets, like the picture I showed you at the University of Hawaii. Our work at the Princess Kaiulani Hotel was, basically dealing with an offshore investor who's been the owner of the hotel, this hotel and 3 others, at least 2-3 generations. And what's intriguing here, and this might be a sort of a sharp contrast, is that he is a Japanese landowner, takes a very keen interest and responsibility in Hawaiian history. He is responsible for the care of Ainaha, which was this estate of Kaiulani and her mother Likelike and her father Cleghorn. And in the namesake of the hotel, Princess Kaiulani Hotel, she's perpetuated. Mr. Osano also owns the Palace Hotel in San Francisco, if you have a chance to visit, which is where King David Kalakaua, one of our lead rulers, our king, brother to Miriam Likelike, passes away. So I share this because here's a Japanese man who has no obligation, but is interested to figure out, how do I tell the right story? However you want to define right. And so here in the existing hotel is this reading room, they call it. It's a small, quaint room, but it has a lot of Hawaiian text. This is where a lot of cultural programming happens at a very limited scale. And so when they were asking us to think about how do we renovate this hotel, we started with that, with understanding place. And really quickly, I know I'm running out of time here. What you see here is a distribution of studies that were done over the years in Waikiki in this particular area. And what I really want to highlight was a couple of things. The orange area is even underneath the urban landscape. We do these test trenches. There's still a historic layer. There's a horizon layer that has what was here in those 200-300 years before everything started to change. Each of these triangles denotates a burial, a Native Hawaiian burial, because again, burial practices connected to Konia's conversation about ohana. It wasn't taken care of by an outside party. You didn't go to a mortuary to bury your dead. You didn't go to a church initially to handle that. The families handled that kuleana. And so each of these triangles, you know, if you put the map of 1881 with these triangles, you can start to understand that relationship of responsibility of people to place over time. So we want to understand that landscape. And then we actually did some test trenches, and to amplify what I just said about the burials, we even inherit not good things. So what you're seeing here is a trench where we identified a burial on the property site, which is now part of the loading and unloading zone for the hotel. And somewhere probably in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, you know, prior maybe to the original cottages being installed, was a pipe that we found, and that pipe basically separated. We identified one individual, female, and that this pipe bifurcated the Eevee with the ancestral remains. So we have now inherited, how do we address that? We call this a haumia, it's a defilement. How do we show honor and respect to this kupuna that has been injured, hampered in terms of our understanding into the afterlife and the next spiritual realms? How do we redress that? We still find footprints or the stepping stones of the church that was present there underneath this landscape of what is now today a front load of some small shops. That church had a formal cemetery for its time, and those burials were moved from one church to another. So we've inherited that. So with all that being said, it's like, well, what good is there, Kawika, right? So much change over so vast amount of time. And so we said, well, if we're going to do something different, we have to start again with the simplicity of place. And so we started to pull together maps to understand this was the Ainaha Estate in its fullness. This was the stream that flowed next to it. And that today, minus one little triangle park that you can walk to in Waikiki, the only place you'd understand that at a certain point in time was the street signs. Because there are people that also are recognizing, along with the newspapers, that the only way we can retain memory in place was to do it wherever we could. And so this corner here, intersection of Kaiulani and Cleghorn, again, Cleghorn, her father, Kaiulani, her namesake. What you see here, though, on this GIS map or Google Maps, you see these place names, and this pictures on this little intersection here. Kaiulani's name is not even on the map at this extent. Tusitala is the affectionate poetic name given to Robert Louis Stevenson. So again, a friend of the family. Kapili is the namesake of her mother. So the memory and history of this place, of the importance of our li'i, the importance of everything I just told you for the last 20 minutes, pretty much narrowed down to 2 or 3 streets, and was primarily a residential neighborhood, but one that was born in the 60s. Again, I wish I had more time. There were Native Hawaiians in the 70s inspiring us, John Dominus Holt being one of them, Hanani K. Trask raising a sense of consciousness, understanding our role, and George Kanahele being a modern historian that started to influence and guide 80s and 90s urban design district guidelines for Waikiki. Yet even today, this is pictures from today, we still have things like Mahalo Ha Burger. I can't even say that like wrong or correct. Mahalo being a word for gratitude, aloha being the word for love, is now this, I don't know what to call this, for a burger stand. I've never eaten there. I'm not sure if the burgers are good, but if you walk through there and you see that, I don't know, up to you, check it out. We still have the caricatures and misrepresentation and appropriation of our culture through, things that were, important to us, our lei, our extension of love of flower, representing being cared for and being sheltered. Our ki'i now being misrepresented as tiki and part of the tiki kitchi culture, showing more, that we still have responsive. I mentioned Fort Drusi being that coastal front to Waikiki, and now we have Kanaka and Hawaiians from the 60s and 70s to current expressing themselves in the anti-militarization of our islands. We have this is the Fort Drusi Museum, where we actually have a piece entitled Kalehua Halale'i, which was done by Rocky Jensen as a means of trying to come to some level of, well, I feel like we're always in this place of compromise to have these conversations. And again, here, these are residential units, both. This is the Ritz-Carlton, recent development, and this is one of the older homes that still exist. These are both residential, if you can kind of put that juxtaposition into your mindset. And yet over time, we still had the persistence of folks like Uncle George Helm, George and Pualani Mossman with Lalani Village, an authentic Hawaiian place in the 1930s, with everything else going up around it, they were still trying to maintain and hold space where even the last living court chanter for Kalakaua, Koluvai Maka, was still a teacher there. And of course, to more times of modernity with Alfred Apaka, Brothers Casimiro, the Waikiki Beach Boys, Tukana Moku. And we continue to persist. This is some of the efforts I get to work with when I'm not wearing my planner hat and I serve with my nonprofit, of doing events, and mostly still from the standpoint of presentation and sharing, but the fact that there's more spaces, more kipuka, we call them, these oases for the presence of our culture, the legitimacy of our culture, and now the representation. This is also Kunia's surf club up here in this upper right, so not to pay homage to Waikiki Surf Club. We still have people like Auntie Thelma Kehaulani Cam, who works at the Princess Kaiulani and other hotels. She's been part of the hotel establishment since 1971, and her job is the cultural liaison. So, of course, not only one person can do this job, but she has received many accolades, and her love for her culture, her love for her people is exemplary and exponentially profound in how she just meets the everyday person and treats them with aloha, love, and courtesy. Not unlike Princess Kaiulani herself, who was recognized in these language accounts, newspaper accounts, as being one of high benevolence for her people. Okay, I'm running out of time, so maybe I'm going to stop here soon. But the codification now of these ideas of sense of place was then implemented as per policy in the Waikiki Special District Design Guidelines, where there's actually paragraphs that say, what is a Hawaiian sense of place or representation supposed to look like? And I'll tell you, it's always a question mark, because the initial rounds of these was having to do with aesthetic responses, having rock walls, basalt rock walls, having water features, and maybe some programming. But the return of the Hawaiian sentiment to place has to start with the people themselves. This is one of the first projects I got to work on, and it's not perfect, but what I liked about it, it was the first purposeful creation of open space where we could actually have families come and feel like they're not being shushed out of the hotel because they're not paying the high hotel room rates, and they can just sit and be and take in a particular event and enjoy the space as it was once was. Apuakehao, as I mentioned, the stream that once existed is codified in memory. There's signage you'll find when you walk through Waikiki, a very well-intended historical narration and tour that you can take self-guided. And you'll see portions of that stream still represented in the water features. Here we see some kalo plants, our staple food that fed us. But here it's just an aesthetic because we need a Department of Health approval to actually use the food for food purposes. I have many more slides, but maybe, I want to share this last slide because this is also our dear friend Eddie, who is a Hawaiian modernity, bringing the traditional back to the front. So this is an older picture of Waikiki, as I mentioned many times. And again, what he's doing at Kapapaloi Kanewai and others is to ensure that memory. This is a mural done by modern native Hawaiian artist Solomon Enos, that again, whether it's through art, whether it's through cultural practice, we persist and we remain. So I'm about 7 slides short of the ending, but let me stop there because I'm at my time, and thank you very much.
Well, are you sure? Would you like to continue a little bit more just to get to that? We have five. Right now, we have 5 questions, and we can get to those.
Okay.
But
okay.
I think we have time.
Okay. So representation of who we are in our landscape today. We still have the Helemoa Grove, which was on some of those older maps. Uluniu, again, representation in the landscape of art. We have our iwi. I mentioned our burials. In some cases, decisions had to be made to establish a place of sovereignty, I call it, an actual area. This is near the Honolulu Zoo. So if you take a walk and visit during your visit here to the zoo, you'll see this and you may wonder, what is this? What is this space? It's a burial ground. And we try to show honor and respect in its design. This is the Hilton Hawaiian Village down here. And what I'm showing here and illustrating is that within here too, we have iwi in rest. But more importantly, to make this connotation of connection over time, it's probably one of the first predominant native landscapes in all of Waikiki. Not perfect, but close. What you see here is at the Hawaii Prince Hotel, which is telling a story that goes back to those older maps where the hinana or the pua, the fishlings of the opai, not opai. I'm trying to. Anyway, the young fishes that come to the muliwai, to the estuaries, as you can see here, again, it's being represented by the carpet because that stream no longer exists. But these copper forms were formed by the hands and hearts of hotel employees who have been around for many years, visitors, and local people. And I feel like this is a great, and this was led by Kaili Chun. And what I love about this is Auntie Gussie, who was a noted kapa maker. She was from Kalia, this area. And when she walked into this hotel after the renovation for the first time, she cried because she actually, in her memory, saw what we were trying to depict. She brought that memory to life, and she thanked us for being able to do that. So again, it's not perfect, but these are the places we try to do things. And as we think about how we apply ancestral connections with technology, we utilize things like sun paths to represent our understanding of passage of time, in the built landscape. So this is just taking the 3D version of buildings, removing them. So in Aina House, we're thinking about space to actually see what our kupuna may have saw from that vantage point with all the buildings removed. And so this gives us a place to start to think and dream and consider. Where I'll stop is what you see here is my last, will be my second to last picture here. This is a representation of that landscape as we want to see it in the future. Although I'm showing water features here, I'm trying to work through a plan that we can get that approval from Department of Health to actually grow food, to grow the makaloa, which is the sedge that we use for plating to make our mats, so that the Aina itself is living and thriving and producing and providing. A center point here. Yes, we have retail bays because every resort wants their retail bays. And so I was able to advocate that we're going to have a legacy library that's a center point to the visitor experience in this property. That will be the Kaiulani Legacy Library. But it's going to be a program center where we want to bring in Native Hawaiian practitioners, halau, healers, weavers, carvers, artists, writers, to actually have a space they can call their own. And so from the memory of Kaiulani to this is Etika Anoi Kalekini, who was a staunch advocate for our Iwi Kupuna, who was also from these lands. Unfortunately, she passed away a couple of years ago. Our commitments are continue to persist. They continue to thrive. And just to even show you that Waikiki still plays a community of Native Hawaiian community. We have still our precious cultural resources like our Kapai Mahu stones here that represent the space in between. I'll leave it at that. We have young Native artists and filmmakers trying to retell the story of Waikiki. I definitely encourage you, if you haven't, check out this film by Christopher Kahunohana, and that we, when necessary, still will take to the streets literally to express ourselves, to ensure that we are not forgotten and that our visible presence is a form of indigeneity in the urban landscape, and that we will continue to demand that, to Konia's earlier comment, we exist, and that our spatial legitimacy comes from relational practice and not being excluded. I'll leave the words here. I won't go through this, but these are words of Yosepa Kaho'oluhi Kalamai. Navahi o Kalani Opu. Man, I need a drink of water. I'm messing up my Hawaiian. Joseph Navahi, who was the Native Hawaiian nationalist leader, lawyer, newspaper publisher. In his first publication in the Hawaiian language newspaper, Ke Aloha Aina, he was a pro-patriot of opposing annexation and wanting the kingdom back. He writes in this piece here, Aloha Aina He Hala, what is it? And I thought this was interesting, perhaps, for this group here of geographers, because he likens at that time that the concept of Aloha Aina, or patriotism, was likened to a compass, and that the magnetic pull, that Umi Maganeti, is in the heart of the patriot. And if I can close with the words of Rakupuna, it says here in this line, Nakela aloha I loko lako e hana ulilo kahune kanele kainea me na pōpilikia he nui mea ole loa ia lako. No ka mea ua nui aku ke aloha no ka aina hana mamua na mea ea pau loa. And that simply translates, it is that aloha within, that loyalty and love for our homeland, that brings people hope. At such a level that things like poverty, destitution, strife, and grief, himea ole, are nothing to them, because the love, that aloha that they hold for their aina hana, their birthland, is greater than any other thing. And to me, if anything you take away from anything I said today, just remember, when you come to Hawaii, when you come to Waikiki, that there's a presence, an essence, and a continuance of who we are as a people. And on that note, I want to thank you again for your time and patience with me this morning. Mahalo.
Oh, mahalo nui. And Konia, you can turn your camera back on so we can see you, and to your face, you extend our great gratitude for, I feel like the Millennium Falcon is coming out of light speed, after a long, fast journey. So we really appreciate it. We know you've only just scratched the surface of what could be said about so many of these subjects. But that's what we want to do with this webinar series, is really kind of titillate the imaginations of our future guests as to what they might expect when they come here. We do have some questions I want to get to, and you did well on time, really. I really mahalo you for really honoring that. And we have kia ora to Kelly Nabraski from Aotearoa to Ika Maui, the North Island. And it happens to be Te Wiki o Te Reo Maori, their week to celebrate the Maori language. And she and her children are just loving hearing our Hawaiian language from you. And they're connecting to that. And they wanted a word about, you mentioned about the loss of place names. I think it's part of this question. Could you say more about language politics in Hawaii and the protocols of its use in contemporary times? And how should conference attendees approach this as visitors? Should they feel brave and comfortable enough to use the language? Avoid it? What's your mana'o on that?
Well, let's see here. Politics of language. So thanks to our ohana in Aotearoa, we have been able to make great strides in for a language in survivance, right? About 1% of the population here speaks Hawaiian. So we have a great deal of work to do. However, great things are happening. And so the politics surrounding language, I'll speak from the University of Hawaii. It's been amazing. That struggle that happened in the 1980s to get Hawaiian to be acknowledged. Truly, Hawaii is one of I think it's the only state in the US where there are 2 official languages, but we have to struggle to get that language, the Hawaiian language, to be acknowledged and to be accepted generally in everyday usage. Now, at the University of Hawaii, the impact of these small little bursts of language resurgence has had a profound impact on the way that we conduct research. It is a new way of investigating because we have the first Punana Leo Hawaiian language classes are now sending either their mo'opuna to Hawaiian language schools. So we have reached that 3rd generation of language regeneration. So these makua, who were the first classes in Punana Leo, are now having their children come to university, and they are fully capable of engaging in research in Hawaiian. A lot of what you saw Kawika present was because we now have young budding scholars who can read their own language, who can write in their own language, and who can conduct protocol in their own language, so that they have proper guidance on how to do research and to treat the language of our kupuna. Hawaiians, Kawika mentioned that we were one of the foremost literate nations at our time, and the proof is that we have this huge repository of Hawaiian language newspapers that up until maybe 20 years, 30 years ago, we could not even begin to access because we didn't have access to our own language. But those days are slowly fading. So the politics of language is present. When you come, my advice is to give it a try, to say some words. It's simple to say mahalo, to say thank you, to say please, to say aloha, and to mean it, right? When you say aloha, you're putting yourself out there. And for me, I don't just say aloha to any old buddy. I say it to people who I really want to offer my aloha to. If somebody goes out of their way to help you while you're here, just say mahalo and aloha. And you got to mean it from the deepness of your gut, because that's where the seat of the heart is. The politics is real though. And so, yeah, that's my mahalo.
That may give insights to a whole other webinar. We can get into the language issue, but Kawika, you talked about the loss of place names. And can you speak to the value of place names, and why, which is why we don't want to lose them, in terms of giving insight into the characteristics of place, and how embedded in that name is really a lot of geographical data?
Yeah. So short version here, place names have meaning in Hawaiian because, again, the how the language is structured, right, is descriptive. It connotates memory, but really it captures actual phenomena. Like the one that comes immediately to my mind, like Waikiki or Waikiki literally means like these bubbling waters, because again, there's by nature of the springs and the streams that were creating this movement of water, and again, and moving water is life-giving water. That's what Waikiki is, and in contrast, there's another area in the area of Maui called Wailuku, which Luku means utter and ultimate destruction. And it also tells you something about, well, maybe when it rains hard and it floods, it actually creates these phenomena. So the importance of place names, one, it codifies memory, but also gives you actual characteristics of how the land with its resources once moved and perhaps needs to move again. Maybe we don't see as much kiki as we want in Waikiki, but that Waikiki, that essence still exists. And again, I can talk about other things too, memory, but also importance of history. And then when we come to a place, so your area there at Hilton Hawaiian Village, it's an ili called Kalia. And Kalia has a connotation of one being patient or being able to wait. The idea that not everything has to happen rush, like my talk, but that you can be in a place where there's repose and you can sit by that stream. You can imagine that stream as it's hitting the water, and you say, I'm in Kalia, and feel that, as Konia said, you got to feel those words, and leave it at that.
So feel free to really embrace the language and listen to it, attempt to use it, and especially with feeling, connecting to it, and with feeling. And thirdly, think about what the language is telling you in terms of insights into this place. All good counsel for our guests. We have a question about Hawaiian chiefs. Were they half human, half divine? Are they seen as embodiment of benevolence, history, culture? You mentioned Opuali'i, the generous chief. Tell us more about our view of chiefly leadership.
Oh, that's another hour. We have another hour, at least. Konia, do you want to take this one in a 1-minute version? I'll jump in after.
I'll tackle are they half human, half divine? I think our ancestors knew that they were human. However, the reason why we dwell on the Kumulipo is because these chiefs and their lineage was respected because they were associated not only to the gods who came to us, they were associated with the gods, but to the universe, to this pole, right? To this deep, dark, powerful entity. And that is where their mana, and that is where their life essence and their right to rule came from. And so they were treated as gods. There are many, many kapu around different kinds of chiefs, kapu, or that set the behavior of certain classes of people around them. Until today, that happens. There are some kumuhula or just very extremely powerful people who you don't even want to approach them because they scare you. And so, but it's that mana, right? They have this incredible mana, and you approach them with reverence and respect. So the chiefs had that same kind of ranking where it's not so much half human, half God, but rather they had a link to the beginning, right? That pole. And with it came a huge amount of responsibility, but mana as well.
And I'll just quickly add on, I think what you see with the transition and changes of land, is some of the transitions and changes of the interaction, if you will. So I spoke a lot about Ka'iulani, Lunalilo, Emma being accessible, and I think it's because their population was dying, so they wanted to be these, vessels of hope, right? People still saw them for who they were and that connectivity to the initial sources, and that in this big time of change, really their centering point was to not just communicate hope like as just a feeling of emotion, but to stand in that presence and say, despite all that we lost, we still remain. And so to me, the power of that, and like human beings, some people are good, some people are not good. Some of us are good on some days, and some people are not so good on bad days. I think it's the balancing of the benevolence factor is a sense of responsibility. It codifies that sensibility. It goes back to simplicity, that aloha is reciprocity, that there's a give and exchange to that. So like Konia said in the beginning, the best way you can do that when you're there, if you're going to say aloha, say it with intent, say it with meaning. And in that aspect, if you will, you are bringing forth the characterization of those things we behold into being of the grace of our kupuna and our ali'i. So I'll leave it at that.
There was a performance accountability in our system, as we recall. We think about Umi and the story, the whole our Hawaii Island chiefs. So, but that's a whole other story. What we're going to do, besides the webinars, we're working with AAG to kind of create a list of sites and so forth, links that you can go to. Wehewehe is a beautiful one. Thank you. That's obviously going to be there for language purposes. But Papakilo database, Awaiʻulu, there are a number of other online sources of information for those of you in the audience, who are curious about aspects of Hawaiian history, want to take a deeper dive than may be offered in the webinars or at the conference itself. We'll try and give you those links over time. One more question we can squeeze in to honor this guest, Guy. What can we do to be in right relationship with the people, the water, and the land, particularly around food, if and when we come to Hawaii?
Well, I'll give this a little vignette. We're islands in the middle of the sea. We too are dealing with climate change, and the influence of poor decision making. So a year ago or so, we had this tremendous on Oahu. It was absolutely a disaster that jet fuel made it into our water system. Absolutely disastrous. Now we're looking at Maui, our family and friends on Maui who had to deal with this disaster. So when it rains, for me now, when it rains, I just say quietly. So I think when you come here, be thankful for all of the natural elements that you are going to experience.
Am I the only one for whom Konia is breaking up, or is she breaking up for others as well? Okay.
Yeah, she's
Konia, you froze and your bandwidth issue. You might want to turn off your camera, Konia, so we can. That might help your bandwidth issue.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back. You're back.
Oh, okay. We can hear you.
Yeah, I was just trying to say when you come here to be thankful, right, for the natural elements that you get to experience. When the rain hits you, don't be afraid of the rain, but rather say thank you.
Yep. I'll make mine really simple. You're coming to Hawaii. You're coming to a special place in Waikiki. I'll say it plainly. You can go any place. You can go cheesecake factory any place else in the continent. You can go to California Pizza Kitchen. Just look for those kipuka, those oasis discovery of food trucks and the diversity of our food. Doesn't have to be just Hawaiian food, but again, the beauty of our islands is that we have many representation of ohana that come from different spaces and places of origin. So to me, if you're talking about food as a place of interjection, like don't waste, right? Be thankful, don't waste water, do all those kinds of good things. But I'm a lover of food, so when I travel, I want the authentic. Look for those small pockets where you can taste the flavor, and in doing so, you'll probably meet the people as well, the locals that like to go there and hang out. And I think if anything, be humble in the space you're in, recognize that it is a complicated history, and sometimes that complications come out in how we sometimes react to tourists, not to scare folks, but people are good in nature. And I think if you're good in nature to people, that is 99% of the time reciprocated back, but that sometimes it can be complicated. And just be thankful for you to come to one of the most beautiful places on earth, at least in my humble opinion. So, wow.
Well, thank you very much, Kawika. And Konia, I don't know if we lost you, if you've had a computer glitch, because I don't see you there, but we will certainly extend our gratitude to Konia as well as Kawika for wonderful presentations. God, it just feels like you've just scratched the surface of a very important iceberg that we should take in which we should take a much deeper dive. We had a guest. The last question was not a question, but really the gratitude of our audience that really appreciated what you have to say today. So to those of you who tuned in, we thank you as well. And whether you're tuning in live or whether you're tuning in by way of recorded version on the website, this promises to be a really outstanding conference. We're glad you're here, and we're here to help you learn and help this profession and this field build and see what it can do to kind of help us continue to develop here in Hawaii. So with that, Konia is back, so we can reconnect him by audio, just so we can long enough to say thank you. Make sure she knows that we are very grateful for her.
Oh, there she is.
Konia, can you hear us? You're muted.
I got kicked out, but they let me back in.
As they should. You did such a wonderful job, and we really appreciate. We know you're very busy, both of you, and thank you for taking time to be a part of this. Don't be surprised if there are follow-up questions and interests as we get closer and closer to the April conference date for more information, because you've really, I think, stimulated the imagination and the interest of our audience. And that's our objective here today, to educate and to get people interested in the conference. So we accomplished our objective. So again, to our two thought leaders, as well as all of our guests, we thank you very much for being a part of this webinar, and we look forward to the next webinar, which is going to be an exciting one on recalibration about this movement that Kawika really referenced in terms of some of the design and features and some of the land uses in Waikiki, which is very densely developed in other areas. So we have Kawika Winter and Rosie Allegado coming next week in a webinar. It's going to be just as amazing as this one. So we look forward to seeing you at another time. Till then, ahui ho, till we see you again. Aloha.